What is evil, and who decides this? When left to devices, some humans try things I'm not allowed to say in the first 30 seconds of a video because everyone in the world lives in America. The trope of the evil wizard is as old as time itself. It appears in folk and fairy tales from the very beginning of civilization. It's baked into fantasy fiction, certainly, and some might say it's even older than the kindly good wizard, though I would personally contest that. Is it a product of piety? Of the wish to be free of tyrants, of anti-intellectualism? Who cares? Jesus Christ. It's a villain. What more do you want? Maybe it's the fucking misled good guy. Power hungry. Something like that. Corrupted, maybe. Deal with the demon, you know, it corrupts you, it does black magic, summons corpses, that kind of thing. He steals, abducts maidens and twinks because that's what the plot needs him to do as a villain. Come on, let's get a move on here. There's a plot we need to get to. And look, I'm not gonna knock something that works, but I do like a little more depth to my villains. And especially the evil wizard is sort of an archetype that has taken center stage when it comes to evil mages, when there's really a whole bunch of other ways to go about it. Much like Mage the Ascension can expand our mind as to what a wizard can be, it does some of its most interesting work when it comes to exploring the concept of evil. So even if you are, for some reason, here even though you don't play any Mage or World of Darkness games at all, if you're here to maybe not even play any kind of game, maybe you're more of a writer or a world builder, stick around! A lot of the stuff I'm going to talk about in this video is going to expand your horizons too. It's going to be full of ideas that you can use in whatever setting you want. Don't make a video about magic systems unless you have read the huge tomes that are the Mage rulebooks, I guess. And if you've clicked on this because it says Alex Jones in the title, hello as well to you. There will be an Alex Jones reference much later in this video. That will happen. It's not clickbait, it actually is in the video. But this isn't about conspiracy theories. We're talking about the lore of World of Darkness, which is a pen and paper TTRPG. It's a role-playing game, or rather a whole range of role-playing games set in an alternate version of our world, where like vampires and monsters are real. But none of that is actually real. It's made up. Please do not believe it. I do not believe it. That's not what this video is about. I have to say this because it's happened to me before, right? On my short story channel, Who is Betty, there's sort of a creepypasta called The Evolutionary Reason for the Uncanny Valley. And for whatever reason, it's become sort of a haven, a hotbed, very popular with people who believe what it says. Like they are genuinely engaging with it and they're like, oh, this scientist, I looked his name up and he doesn't appear anywhere. It's like, yes, because he's fake. It's a short story. It's not a real thing that happened. Anyway, most wizards and most entities in World of Darkness in general are morally ambiguous. It's kind of part of the whole setting. Often evil is a matter of perspective, and even when it kinda isn't, it still kind of is. At the very least, the wizard doing the evil things will have some sort of justification for them. This is not really the case with Marauders, and it definitely isn't the case with Nephandi. As a quick content warning, this section of the video deals heavily with themes of derealization and a loss of a grip on reality. It deals with the category of crazy people, of like as a group, as a label, and insanity in a similar way. And if those things are things that you're sensitive about, you might want to take a break every once in a while. You can just hit the pause button. I will be right here. Madness is always a danger to mages. Their very existence is predicated on the denial of consensual reality, and understanding that what sleepers believe is real is not necessarily real, and you can change it if you have the will and the right tools. Unfortunately, this also requires belief in those alternative tools and paradigms, and perhaps more than anyone else, mages are constantly confronted with realities that directly oppose theirs. It's not just that their vision of the universe diverges from the consensual real world. they usually reside in. All the other mages they know also have their own ideas, and these mages see those made manifest also. It's not a stretch to believe that the awareness that reality is subjective might make it difficult for you to keep your grip on said reality. Which is why some mages slip into a state of insanity that breaks them. It turns them into marauders. Mages who don't just break consensus, but supplant it altogether. They walk around with a sort of reality bubble around them that adheres to their personal ideas of what reality is. And as they move through the world, things enter those bubbles and change to become compliant with their personal paradigm. Cars become horse-drawn carriages, birds become government spy robots, curtains sing Nina Simone, and human souls divest into ethereal clouds of smoke. And when they leave, everything goes back to normal again, as though nothing had happened at all. Some say that marauders have simply achieved enlightenment before they were ready for their ascension. And are we really to say that they're wrong? Is your vision of the world actualizing wherever you go not the ultimate goal of a mage? Is it not their ultimate personal paradise, but it's everywhere? Marauders are dangerous not because they're malignant, but because they are out of control reality benders. Usually just changing things around in a way that violates consensus would lead to paradox backlash. And it does with Marauders too. Consensus is not happy about a bubble of alternate reality pushing its way through its guts. Like an acrid fart, it's not really something that Consensus enjoys. But instead of hitting the Marauder, the paradox backlash hits other mages and entities around them. So while mages tend to try to hunt and get rid of Marauders, they have to be careful not to be sent to reality prison in a kangaroo court case of mistaken identity. Of course, you don't have to be a marauder for your grip on reality to become a problem. Mages are always at risk of succumbing to a state of mind known as quiet, which is not always necessarily very quiet, in which they lose their grip on what is real and what is part of their magical paradigm. This can happen as paradox backlash, or in moments of great stress, distress, or cataclysmic realizations of some sort of deeper truth, which is something that mages do a lot. And it's a sliding scale. It's not a binary thing where, like, at first the mage becomes a bit more eccentric and delusional in ways that no one, especially not they themselves, might immediately notice. It progresses through irrational shifts in personality and minor manifestations of their hallucinatory impressions, known as hobgoblins, to them ultimately becoming walking sources of paradox that just sort of manifests things all around them. At this point, I should mention, without the benefit of being immune to paradox backlash. That is, by the way, one of the main reasons that magical paradigms and traditions exist in the first place. It's not that mages lack the imagination to shape the world in novel ways entirely according to their will. It's that being predisposed to a certain already extant alternate worldviews, becoming part of a society built around those views, is a safeguard. For mages, a loss of reality means nothing compared to sleepers, but groups, however informal, check one another with the reinforcement of their alternative consensus. Unfortunately, like many things that exist to keep us safe, this creates a huge amount of conflict and suffering as well. As with so many things in the world of darkness, there are three major flavors of quiet that align with, you guessed it, the metaphysical triad: dynamism, stasis, entropy. Mages in their worldview are immensely diverse, so what each of the quiet types means includes a lot of variance. But they can all be sort of categorized as one of these three because, well, maybe it's because we want to do that, maybe because we need to categorize them somehow. Dynamism is represented by naturally the most common type of madness, which asserts a different reality through your subconscious. The world is different than how it appears because it is missing the elements of your paradigm, and so you will just perceive them, and eventually they will just show up because they are there. It's everyone else who's in denial about their existence. Madness also comes with severe emotional instability and mood swings as you are drawn in and out of various degrees of reality. Aspects of your mind will get excited excited about knowing that what you believe is true, and then lament a moment later that what you believe seems to not be true after all. And these powerful emotional states will bleed into the rest of you. Stasis is represented by the more uncommon denial, also known as clarity. Instead of asserting things about the world, your mind instead denies anything that isn't congruent with your particular worldview. Initially, certain conclusions and thoughts that would seem obvious become impossible to imagine. Things that don't fit into your paradigm are replaced with whatever the closest equivalent to them is. But over time, those things either get deleted from your perception, which is a problem for you if there's like a 4.5-ton mechanized cyber rhinoceros charging your way that you can't see. Not a great place to be in, usually. Or they become a problem for everyone else when people's spells selectively stop working. Can also be both. You'd think that might be useful in suppressing deviant magic, but not even the technocracy uses this kind of quiet in their operations because it is completely unpredictable and as liable to mess up your allies as it is your enemies. Finally, entropy is represented by the rarest of them all, thankfully, morbidity. Despite its rarity, it's perhaps the most feared and cautioned against among entropists specifically, but it can really happen to anyone. Where madness affirms and denial, denies, morbidity disintegrates, rejects, decays belief in reality and its paradigms. It brings destructive forces like violence and death to the fore, as qualms and rules evaporate, and things that were once meaningful are now just emotional vestiges to a newborn nihilist. Being beings of belief in their own reality, the rejection thereof creates a huge amount of terror in mages, which they may not entirely be aware of, but which they have to alleviate somehow. Early stages are often characterized by distrust and paranoia, perhaps even doubling down on the legitimacy and sole legitimacy of one's own belief, to the exclusion of everyone else's. Then the destruction begins, driving the mage further and further into extreme acts of depravity, until they eventually abandon all their principles and exist only to harm in the most vile ways imaginable. This is a fast track to becoming a Nephandus, by the way, which we will talk about later, but most Nephandi are not actually crazy. Now, if everyone around you is lucky, all of this is just in your head. I mean, literally, you might be trapped in a mindscape inside your head, essentially in a sort of coma, trying to reconcile your inner madness. But a lot of the time, you're wide awake and making it everyone else's problem. Which is kind of good because everyone knows to look out for your descent into madness. Because the thing is, when someone wakes up from a quiet in like a mindscape type scenario, you don't know if they came out a marauder, and that's like not a problem that presents itself here, but you're still a walking reality hazard. If you and or others don't manage to stop your descent into madness, eventually it will reach a point of no return. In Mage 20, this point is when the madness meter exceeds the number 6. At this point, your mind just breaks. The immensity of willpower mages possess becomes irrelevant. You are irrevocably shattered. You are a marauder. Even if the strength of your quiet diminishes and you become more in touch with baseline reality, your mind is broken and fundamentally delusional. You will never be normal again. Many marauders are actually quite lucid, even clever with the nature of their delusion, able to pretend that they are perfectly fine. It's not at all uncommon for marauders to be aware of the fact that others think they're crazy. And it can be very frustrating to know that everyone else is just incapable of seeing the truth. But you still have your agenda, so you'll have to be smart and keep quiet about it. Since mages tend to be highly eccentric, even some of the marginally louder marauders can sometimes fly under the radar. Usually what happens is that these broken mages begin practicing a wackier, alternate form of their original paradigm, that often includes elements which are illogical in that paradigm. An enlightened medical doctor might take to using dead body parts as a new focus because the dead cannot be harmed by injury or disease. A Shaolin ascetic might begin heavily indulging in drugs as a means to sharpen their focus. A forest druid might begin polluting the land in order to make the pollution into something natural. Some of these things are things any mage might just try. You'd need to know these people well to see how that is completely contrary to their nature. Another thing that might clue you in is that Marauders are often able to create certain effects that they should not be capable of. The according mage simply does not know enough about the spheres needed to manifest a certain effect, but they manifest the effect anyway. They just do it. There's not necessarily any logic to this. It's not like they can sometimes ignore a minor sphere they would need to cast a certain spell, or that it's like rarer with spells that are completely outside of their enlightenment bailiwick. They sometimes just do things that are in line with their paradigm. It's entirely unreliable, but it happens. On the flip side, Marauders are limited in the level of power that they can achieve. They do, of course, still grow and learn, but the most powerful mages need to reconcile concepts entirely paradoxical to how they and everyone view the world. And a Marauder's twisted perception of reality simply isn't capable of doing that. Not that it's really a concern for them. Most Marauders are either hunted or evicted from reality into deep umbral realms and sort of disappear into strange worlds where even daring mages fear to tread. Though perhaps that is the best place for them to be. Perhaps that is where they can find true enlightenment. Because their power to change reality doesn't diminish out there. They are just completely shielded from all paradox now, and all they encounter submits to their localized reality. They may not even be aware that they have left the real world behind centuries ago. Aside from being strongly flavored by the type of quiet that turned them into a marauder, there are two additional categories they fall into. As is often the case with mental health issues, you have to come up with broad categories because what you're trying to taxonomize is too diverse and idiosyncratic. However, with some notable exceptions, these two map pretty neatly onto whether a quiet was loud or, quiet. Internal marauders, also known as perceptual marauders, are those quiet ones. They don't do a lot of reality warping, it's only their private perception that is warped, and they tend to be the most keenly aware that others don't see things this way. So while there is little danger of them bending everything to their localized consensus, though the danger is never zero, they are quite good at fitting in and slowly shaping the people around them to their personal ideas, which are, of course, utter madness. But they're infectious. Mages are susceptible to this, but sleepers are even more so. And consider that all the organizations do include sleepers, often sorcerers or extraordinary citizens who know some basic procedural magic. And forget about organizations that were in a marauder's control in the first place. They will change how those sleepers see the world, often intentionally, as marauders will sometimes stop at nothing to bring people around to their view of things. If left undetected over time, they can change the whole way major organizations work. The other type of marauder is the external marauder, also known as an actualized marauder. They will change the world around themselves wherever they go and follow agendas beyond anyone's understanding. As a threat, they're much more overt, because though the changes their presence creates do revert to their original state, effects they manifest obviously do not, and they are utterly unconcerned with paradox. So not only can they do as they please, the paradox backlash does double damage to the world around them as well. They're not all cataclysmic wrecking balls, right? Some exist in a consensus not unlike everyone else's, a world pretty similar to our own, where perhaps humans are ultimately just animals with no impulse control. So when they sit in a McDonald's late at night enjoying some soggy fries, those two complete strangers next to them will just start fucking on the table. Those two rival football fan groups will beat the shit out of each other. And the employee back there who hates himself because he works at Macca's will dip his face in hot oil as punishment. More like Mad Donald's Am I right? To them, of course, this is entirely normal. The whole world is like this. When they leave, those behavioral tendencies will no longer be there, but all the things that happened because of them will still have happened. At that point, it might have been better if they had just believed everything in the universe is made of cheese, because at least then everybody would have left the McDonald's pretty much unharmed. Maybe the people in the kitchen would have melted a little bit. That would have been unfortunate. Though consensus knits itself back together pretty diligently, often erasing all evidence of what has happened, which is why you don't see many photographs of Santa's sleigh, even though the milk and cookies are gone, it can still be deeply traumatic for the people who experience them. Especially if those people are mages and can actually remember the experience with great clarity, as opposed to just like blurred and bizarre memories easily attributed to some other state of intoxication. That can bring those mages into their own quiet, or perhaps worse, awaken potential sleepers straight into Crazy Town with little to no guidance. This is one of the ways that, like, unions of marauders form. Not to fight capital, but to, like, social units. They obviously have no organized society. Their categorization is entirely an external thing. There's no, like, shared marauder identity. Most marauders would reject that label and exist entirely within their own reality anyway. But they do sometimes work together and amass cults and followings, often because they confront people with this alternate reality and it just snaps them straight out of consensus. Sometimes they can work together because the nature of their delusion is similar enough. They agree on enough things for them to recognize that, though the others are wrong about some of the stuff, they are, by and large, more understanding of the truth than most. It's like how conspiracy theorists who don't believe all the conspiracies but respect and work with others who believe in some level of conspiracy. When that happens, we call it a cabal. Some marauders are part of the same delusion, often created by the same experience, though not always. This can also happen as the beliefs of various marauders, especially those in a cabal, are influenced by one another and eventually they line up. They don't agree among each other at all anymore. They're just the only ones who understand. In which case, we call this a fusion. And it can be quite dangerous, because these marauders sometimes share an almost telepathic link with one another. They may even be actually trying to induct new people into their fusion. On especially rare occasions, something even crazier happens. Marauders work together while being completely unaware of each other, perhaps even diametrically opposed in their goals and worldviews. They each follow their own crazy plan, and somehow, through the force of mad synchronicity, they can achieve some particular goal they are often unaware of themselves, something greater than the sum of its parts. Usually when that happens, there is some other deeper marauder involved, one who has learned to comprehend the strings of madness and to direct others of their kind. These are excessively rare, luckily, but the technocracy and traditions are always on the lookout for them. Unfortunately, they completely defy rational understanding, both in the way they think and in the way they do actually manipulate those other marauders. It's something you need to be crazy to understand, and apparently among the crazy, there are just some wise enough to know what makes the others tick. There's a surprisingly great number of marauders that you can find in media if you, interpret everything through a wad lens. Patrick Bateman, for instance, is clearly an internal marauder. The Pyro from Team Fortress 2, right? Tim, aka Jimmy Sisko from Misfits, the video game guy, him as well. As for externals, you might say Jobu Tupaki from Everything Everywhere All at Once is a powerful example. Freddy Krueger, but he does live in the dreaming. And also Project Moloch from Dirk Gently, who luckily focuses on the creation of umbral planes on account of being heavily sedated. I also have some in-universe WOD examples, and because various books on Mage and Marauders already have a few of these characters for you, I'm gonna give you a few more entirely of my own creation, to give you an idea as to what a Marauder can be. I'm not officially affiliated with World of Darkness in any capacity, so none of this is remotely canon, it's just my World of Darkness. First, we will talk about Madness-type Marauders, where an example for an internal one could be Weibsviech, a genuine creature by her own definition who stalks the forests of East Germany. An old coven of Verbanists in Western Poland will tell you of a young witch named Annegrate, who decades ago was concerned with the encroachment of more and more construction on the wilderness. She was a recluse, so nobody knows exactly when she went mad, but she most certainly did. In her belief system, humans and the products of human civilization have no soul. They are empty vessels attempting to colonize the natural world and eliminate its spirits. But Weibsvie herself isn't actually human. She has the soul of an animal, and she must fortify the wilderness against the invasion and repel those who would exploit it. In her mind, there is no meaningful distinction between humans, cars, and houses, just as there is no distinction between rabbits, trees, and lakes. There are only two forces: life and empty. One of the good things about this is that a lot of the time, the mayhem she causes is property damage, because that's as good as killing people. One of the bad things is that she's also very good at killing people. Being highly proficient with the life sphere, she is a cunning shapeshifter who constantly alters her appearance, readily switching between looking like an innocuous house cat to a giant bison bear with porcupine spikes. She may even appear human for a while, always as part of some ruse. She never speaks though, because as an animal she doesn't understand speech. She perceives it as a sort of alien telepathy. She also riles up and empowers nature spirits, leading to very localized but nonetheless devastating natural catastrophes. Her madness has been bleeding into these spirits and all the life in the forest. For years now, from the wind to the wolves to the fish, the forests of East Germany are often suicidally hostile toward the forces of humanity. It's no accident that the Red Talons have become so empowered in the heart of Europe over the last few years. Many of the more nature-oriented Garou consider her a powerful ally, though they can only guess as to what she is. Other tribes, like the Glasswalkers, see her as an absolute fucking menace. Perhaps the most frustrating things to those who have attempted to hunt her down, those who survived the attempt at least, is that she seems to have excessively easy access to disappear into the Umbra, specifically the umbral dimension of the infinite primordial forest, which always stirs itself up in her defense. This problem also explains why she's been sighted all over the world. She does seem to be circling Berlin though, as she always has, and recently those circles have been getting tighter and tighter. A more external madness type marauder might be the man known as Odinos, perhaps the greatest stain on the reputation of the Order of Hermes in Greece today. Back when it was known as Chrysanthos Pagoneas III, he was the leader of a small but important chantry located on Salamina Island. The focus of his research lay in divine beings and their associated powers. In other words, he was trying to bind and control the gods. Not just Greek gods, but all kinds of pagan gods, who are of course real, being constructs of the human imagination, and reside in various realms of the Umbra. Even among Hermetics, his approach was a bit frowned upon, mainly because of the dangers involved in such unorthodoxy. Not necessarily its grandiosity, it's very Hermetic. But he was a charismatic guy, a good leader, and a capable administrator. He succeeded beyond his wildest expectations in a ritual to summon and bind the Germanic god Odin, or some version of him, who ended up willingly undergoing castration, so that the Hermetic, who had always been a bit insecure about his own lack of virility, could consume the castrated bits. The problem with eating a god's dick and balls is that you get blasted with so much power, your mind might break. And this guy had already been obsessive about this particular project, to the extent that some of his colleagues were sounding some maybe a little too quiet alarm bells. He was out a few days, comatose, and then he returned and everything was fine. After all, Father had returned! Yes, so basically, consuming the All-Father's genitals made the All-Father aspect of that deity imprint on him. And so he believes he is the literal biological father of every single person alive and dead. And wherever he goes, all those people believe it too. And because he's ostensibly a very nice guy, they love him for it. So he's been touring the world, treated like a beloved family member wherever he goes. People will do him favors. He will do favors for them, often involving the pagan deities of the area, which appear as genuine people with immense power wherever he is. And they too think he is their beloved father. In many ways, his consensus bubble is constantly evolving as he learns more about this or that mythology, though his education on the matter is already quite extensive, and the exact rules depend on the cultural sphere he believes he is moving in. As you can imagine, this creates a huge amount of problems that Adinos feels entirely not responsible for, but the thing is that he's very hard to get rid of, because he's just so damn likable, and he's your dad. Not the one who went out to get cigarettes, but your other dad, who is also your beloved father. How could you say no to him? Moving on to the denial type of Marauder, Overseer VVZ, often pronounced VVZ for those who know her personally, is the designation for an iterator intelligence handler embedded deep within the Void Engineers to fight one of the greatest threats the technocracy has ever encountered. Her real name is Vasilisa Vadimovna Zaslavskaya, once an elite Chekist intelligence agent in the Soviet Union's Committee for State Security, also known as the KGB. Her job was specifically to mathematically discover internal threats in the apparatus and eliminate them. The entire Soviet Union and its communist ideals were supported within the technocracy primarily by Iteration X, while the Syndicate was more of a fan of capitalism. There was a lot of internal warring about this even within the conventions themselves, and Vasilisa was a true believer in the communist project. But of course, it ultimately failed, caving under the imperialist pressure of capitalism, cynicism in the populace, and the brittleness of its own authoritarian structure that was way too repressive to ever be flexible enough to survive into the future, which she had spilled blood for, and the Union ended up abandoning that project. To deal with all these disillusioned enlightened scientists, primarily among the iterators, a number of programs were put into place to, some might say, brainwash them. One of these programs was to have agents visit Soviet ultra-deep space programs like mega gulags and luxury retreats for the bureaucratic elite to convince them that the system was much crueler and more corrupt than they had believed. But the NWO made the mistake of dressing these places up a little bit to just really drive the point home, and Vasilisa, with her analytical mind, noticed the little details that were off. And that made it all look staged, even though it was mostly true. Being in an already agitated emotional state, feeling deeply betrayed by this organization she had served all her life, she ended up breaking, convinced of her heart of hearts of one thing. Somewhere out there in space, there was a shadow technocracy from a mirror universe that had infiltrated and compromised the Technocratic Union. Because the real Technocratic Union would never have abandoned the communist project. As she was retasked, she formulated a report wherein she called this faction Ugrozza Null, Threat Null. For a few years, not many people paid attention to that. There's a lot of reports out there about weird shit. But eventually, after the dimensional anomaly, the Void Engineers finally encountered these people and recruited her as the leading expert for the accounting and analysis of the intelligence gathered. This is even though the Void Engineers are a bit secretive about having encountered Threat Null. She has directed her attention to the front lines, Earth now, fighting her own shadow war on agents that have infiltrated the various conventions, whether they actually have or not. And yes, look, no, Threat Null is actually canon. Threat Null is a canon thing. It's one possible canon at least. I personally don't love it as like a huge thing, but I do still think it's cool. So to me, Threat Null is like the paranoid delusions of Overseer VVZ, which have infected enough other technocrats that they see them now in the shadows too. So it was only a matter of time before their collective madness manifested them into reality. It's a classic example of just how bad things can get when there is a marauder in your midst and nobody knows about it. An external type of denial marauder could be Chanshe He Duyi, a Zen monk who was once considered an apprentice of great wisdom and promise, with an intuitive grasp of the concept of oneness underlying all existence. What in the common parlance between traditions might be referred to as prime. The problem is that He Duyi, deep in meditation about the nature of Zen, made a startling discovery. This concept of oneness was actually, it turns out, bullshit. It wasn't true. It was complete nonsense, utterly made up. And all the philosophy and thought, all reality was built fundamentally on a lie. He tried talking to his peers, they disagreed. He tried talking to his masters, they kindly nudged him toward the idea that he was actually wrong. He even tried talking to those who considered themselves his students, but they couldn't even fathom a concept such as the one he was proposing. He was utterly alone with this crushing realization, this incontrovertible fact that everyone else just sort of seemed to ignore. No one was able to help him or convince him otherwise, and after a time he kept more and more quiet about it, even though it became clearer to him every day. He started seeing it in all the world, the fundamental separateness of all things. Oil and water don't mix, people miscommunicate, things are forced together by the will of construction, but they eventually always fall apart because they don't want to be together. Desperate for answers, he left the path of pure experience and sought literature and other philosophies, discovering, to his great horror, that according to Western physicists, everything is atoms, and they never touch each other. They're tiny little things. And most of it is just empty space. It all drove him further into despair. It started happening more and more until the whole world dissolved around him. These days, He Du Yi is a walking nexus of disassembly. On his sane days, discrete categories of things become separated within the spaces that they occupy, and the order of that discreteness depends on the depth of his madness. A human might separate into flesh, bone, blood, thought, and spirit, unable to interact with itself at the low end, whereas on his darkest days, He Du Yi not only sees the spaces between the atoms, but realizes all structure between them is an illusion as well. It's all just a cloud of matter he moves through because his will exists. Now, because Marauder effects are reversed when they leave, this is not quite as destructive as you may fear, especially on the good days. But the deeper the madness, the higher the chance that people are put together in wrong ways that don't quite violate consensus, but that weren't really there before. DNA damage, damage to information in general, is huge wherever he goes, especially if he stays a while. People develop diseases and disabilities, not to mention have their minds shattered and pulled back together. And behind all that, he is still looking for some explanation, for something that is truly one. In this quest, he consciously disassembles things he encounters, looking for something he cannot pull apart. And that is the kind of Humpty Dumpty all the King's census horses cannot put back together again, making He Du Yi one of the most dangerous marauders alive today, and almost like untouchable, even by paradox spirits, because they also disintegrate. Moving on to the marauders of morbidity, which many hold up to be the worst kind of them. An internal example might be Hexezoiker, once upon a time known as Goosje van de Voer, a member of the Celestial Chorus whose job it was, ironically, to find and destroy marauders. Not much is known about her biographically, except that she appeared in the North American colonies in the early 1970s, like broad-shouldered, deeply religious Dutch woman, and was coaxed into awakening by choristers because of her immense force of will. She was a respected chorister for 40 years, and much of that time she spent rooting out the threat of marauders across the eastern seaboard, sometimes even working with specialists from the other traditions. The problem was that she had this image in her head of marauders being these monstrous witches, driven mad by devils, and she held this belief even though she encountered perfectly sane-seeming examples several times and experienced catastrophe and betrayal at the hands of more subtle marauder agents. She became increasingly steely in her quest, her war against the omnipresent threat of marauder witches. She saw them within the choristers just as much as she saw them without, and realized more and more that they were not the exception, but the rule. Almost all of these reality changes were, in fact, marauders, blaspheming against God's perfect creation, and she had to embrace her inner determination to destroy them. Hexezoiker began a campaign of no mercy, making them all pay for what they did, employing agonizing tortures and methods of execution in the name of God's purity. She knew she alone was chosen by God, and he wanted no restrictions on her. So eventually she was not only hunting mages, she was ritually sacrificing pious people, mostly young adults, to absorb their vitality and divine spark so that she may keep going in the fight against evil using evil's own tactics. It was, after all, sanctioned by God. The Nephandi tried to recruit her. It didn't go well for them. These days, she has a small organization of witch hunters with her, religious fanatics fully infected by her delusions and propensity for cruelty, who believe they are on a holy quest to eliminate all stains upon God's perfect creation. And of course they wear like cool witch hunter outfits, because, they have to. An external morbid marauder could be Yamete, an unlikely man if ever there was one. His real name is lost to history because it was struck from the records. What is known is that he was an engineer in the Japanese Empire around the late 19th century. One of the country's first enlightened scientists in the modern sense. He'd gotten his hands on technological plans by the Society of Ether that described various powerful new technologies with which the Empire's sphere of influence could be expanded significantly. How exactly he got his hands on those, nobody knows, though it definitely wasn't an attempt by the Etherites to spread their ideas into the emerging Japanese Empire by directing a man's awakening that direction. That would be crazy to suggest such a thing. Yamete became obsessed with constructing a ship that could sail the stars, and he pitched that shit to the Emperor personally, apparently so convincing that he was able to secure funding. So he built it, and it worked. He was far from the first, just the first in Japan to captain a steamship in the ether. The problem was that he was absolutely fucking obsessed with the territorial expansion of the Japanese Empire, loyalty to the Emperor, the purity of the Japanese people. The Etherites could not control him or secure his loyalty in any meaningful sense. He built a whole fleet of these ether ships and started making problems all over the place, acting effectively as an ether pirate. That wasn't his view of things, of course. He thought himself a man of great status and repute at the imperial court, though mostly he was just the emperor's pet, a madman there for personal amusement, whose genius would occasionally produce something interesting and useful, but whom nobody actually believed when he talked about sailing the stars. When the Society of Ether left the technocracy in 1904, the nuisance he had been became nothing but a problem. So they sent a fleet to destroy him. In and out, 5-minute adventure, no problem. You know, it was a protracted campaign during which he grew increasingly vicious. They just could not stomp him out. And when his emperor died in 1912, he fucking lost it and went all harakiri on the Etherites. He was convinced that if he rammed himself and the fleet into Victoria Station, the pure steel of the Japanese spirit and the spirit of the dead emperor would suffuse the ship and destroy the enemies of Japan, splitting them apart like an arrow would an apple. What happened instead is that his fleet was blown to smithereens from afar because, you know, he'd been actually trying to go to a very fortified position, and then everything around him was exploding, and he said, "Stop! This cannot be." And so it stopped. He decided that, in fact, everything else must explode, logically. Victoria Station survived because it was far enough away, but his ship, the Mutsuhito, has for over 100 years been an explosion. It's literally just a big explosion with Yamete at the center. And everything it touches, everything it bombards, explodes. Things that couldn't even explode. It's like the whole everything is cake trend from a few years ago, except everything is explosions. He would have loved Torg. Everything on the ship, even the crew, is made of explosion, held together by the unbreakable Japanese spirit. Yamete himself is the only non-explosion thing left, and he is constantly experiencing the agony of being hit full-on by explosions from all over the place, because that's when he stopped all that causality. Genuinely one of the worst hazards in the ether. Luckily, it's completely impossible for the Mutsuhito to approach Earth. It's just too far out of consensus. But the rest of the universe is not so lucky. Before we move on to our next segment, a quick word from me. I am, I guess, the sponsor, and I'm pitching you my novel, Harm's Place, which you can get on Drive-Thru Fiction. It's a riverboat mystery set in a small frontier town on a distant world somewhere in the far future. Sci-fi western, pretty underserved genre if you ask me. People have been buying it, and they've been loving it. And it would mean the world to me if you could get it too. It is also kind of tied to the dollar a little bit because that's how the website works, so even if you do get it printed in the UK, in a sense it may get cheaper in the future, but also it could get more expensive in the near future. Who knows? It's entirely out of my power and out of anyone's power. I love living in this age. So get Harm's Place today. It's the top link in the description. Alright, now that we've talked about the tragic and terrifying type of evil wizard, let's turn to the actual evil wizards. The wizards that even marauders eviscerate on sight. Let's talk about the Nephandi. The classic trope of an evil wizard in fantasy is someone who turned to the practice of evil magic or made a pact with some sort of demonic entity in the interest of gaining more power and pursuing whatever agenda that they pursue. And then eventually many of them become corrupted because, when you use evil as a means to an end, that evil ends up seeping into you as well. Nephandi chuckle at that sort of thing. It's like a child throwing a tantrum at its teddy bear. It's ridiculous. It doesn't even begin to comprehend the depths of what it means to be evil. And Nephandi is not so much an evil wizard as they are a wizard of evil. Evil is not just the means, it's the end. They are committed to the idea of evil as a metaphysical concept. Does that sound edgy as hell? Well, it is. They were just cartoonish villains originally in early editions of Mage. That was their purpose. But the game has evolved, and so have our ideas of Nephandi. Sure, cartoonish evil is fun and can be entertaining for a while, but it gets pretty boring eventually. It's too far removed from the human experience in the sense that it's empty to actually pose any meaningful questions or offer interesting decisions or dilemmas. In newer editions, they didn't yassify the Nephandi, thank God, but they did make their portrayal much more nuanced and rooted in a diametrical understanding of philosophy. If anything, this has made them more vile than a cackling warlock ever could be. And for that reason, I warn you now, we are about to talk about some truly horrific shit here, even if it's just in the abstract. And I'm not talking splatter and gore, but things you may have seen and experienced in the real world. Patterns of abuse, addiction, destruction. The day-to-day of how Nephandi operate. Every sort of vile thing you can imagine a human being doing, Nephandi have done much worse. And it's never bad enough for them. So if you're sensitive to that sort of thing, going forward, always feel free to take a break. Walk away from the video. You have nothing to prove. But really, how could one subscribe to a paradigm of evil? Where's the self-delusion that you're actually doing something good? Well, have you looked at the world recently? Have you looked at the world ever, at any point? It's bad, fam. We humans, especially in the developed nations, so-called, right, have managed to isolate ourselves from it to a certain extent, but existence is war. It's a horrible, constant battle for survival. Poisonous plants and rabid predators, icy winters and searing summers, droughts that parch your skin and bones, storms that ram the force of lightning right up your ass. Disabilities, diseases, invalidity, brain-eating amoeba. What the fuck? Why is there such a thing? How come any day you could catch an infection that could literally kill you in a week by making you shit every drop of blood you have out of a hole in your belly? You could get hit by rocks and have your skull split open. If you're lucky. That's the lucky version. Because if not, you might get your leg crushed and die a much slower and more agonizing death instead. Even here, in our alleged utopia of comfort, we're exploited and taken advantage of. Priests stick their dicks in altar boys and get reassigned somewhere else, while one of the most powerful global organizations silences their victims. We breed animals to be caricatures of themselves that can barely live over generations of forced incest. And then we call them our best friend and pat ourselves on the back for what a good care we take of them. Bosses steal the surplus value of your labor, and you know it. you make more profit for your corporation than they pay you by like a huge amount, and they will always try to pay you as little as they can get away with. And you just do that. You slave away your entire life, getting scammed by banks, insurance, the government, and the politicians running it. You're aware of all of this, doing nothing, because, well, you wouldn't want to step out of line, be seen as a bad person. Well, newsflash, buddy, you're already a bad person. Your smartphone is built with slave labor, the shoes you're wearing were probably sewn together by a child, and the porn you watch stars impoverished Eastern European women who are being kept in some like compound in the Balkans that they can't escape. The truth that you are unwilling to admit to yourself is that you are just weak. Morals are the framework by which you excuse that weakness, dreaming up for yourself some made-up reward as you cry, looking at your betters, having the life you actually want. And they're taking that life from you, right? They're doing it because, well, they choose to. They take what they want and then they have it. And the only reason they taught you to be a good boy and not rock the boat is so they can more easily exploit you. Oh, you're gonna band together, organize, try to build something that'll change anything? Do you think that if that were possible, it would ever have, like, worked? Ever? It's just a way to make you waste your time on, like, pointless pursuits of goody-two-shootness, so you don't actually ever accomplish any of the things that you set out to do. It's a dog-eat-dog world out there. The strong eat the weak. That is just the objective, natural truth. It is evolution, survival of the fittest, the basic law of the universe. Would you not rather be the one who eats? Would you not rather be powerful than weak? Pretty good sales pitch, isn't it? Did you feel despair? Did you feel like maybe I was touching on something? Oh, maybe, I wasn't right all the way, you wouldn't fully agree, but I'm not wrong either, am I? There was a truth in that. I was spitting facts. Congratulations, you've just taken your first step toward your descent into evil. Don't worry. You can come back from this. The truth is, of course, as a beautiful sidebar in an excellent section of White Wolf's Book of the Fallen points out, dogs don't actually eat dogs. Like, it doesn't happen unless they're placed in captivity, tortured, and excruciated to serve as part of a dogfighting ring. And nowhere in evolution in the world is there such a thing as a dogfighting ring. We made that. People made that. Evil people created those circumstances for their own amusement. They are not, however, a law of nature. The worm is not innately corrupt. The weaver trapped it to make it so. But that is the fundamental worldview of the Nephandi, and it's a very appealing narrative the more powerless and alienated you feel. It's a way out. Which is, of course, why the Nephandi seek to create a world in which as many people as possible feel powerless and alienated. It's very important for them to present themselves as the people who understand the real underlying truth, as opposed to all the unrealistic optimists out there. It's a crucial recruitment tool for them, to point out that there is hypocrisy, and therefore you should be a hypocrite. Sure, sheep who don't know about all this are easier to manipulate, but Nephandi see themselves as high-level predators. Predation stands at the core of their ideology. And to be a true apex predator, you need several layers of lesser predators below you that you can eat. Trophic layers, as we would say in ecology. So you need to convince people to join your pyramid scheme. And look, it's an appealing story, right? The impulse for destruction and for self-destruction lies in all of us. Destruction is easier than creation, and thus feels more powerful to do in any given moment. When we crave a feeling of power, for many it's the go-to thing to do. We annihilate out of spite and hatred, out of desperation. Ultimately, as you fall through the ranks of understanding Nephandism, destruction becomes the goal in and of itself. Not just mindless destruction, right? I mean, sure, some Nephandi do that, but they tend to not last very long. Just as those who wish to build destroy in the interest of building, those who destroy build in the interest of destruction. The US government and its global hegemony are currently being destroyed for the simple reason that the people in power hate the world and want to see it burn. The ultra-wealthy have for years been working to erode social cohesion, even though it would create an objectively worse society. They're fooling their cultists into believing that there is another world in it for them, because line go up. But line go up actually helps no one. It doesn't even make a material difference to the richest of the rich when line go up. You know VM Varga from the TV show Fargo? He is perhaps the classicest of archetypal Nephandi in modern media. The feeling of absolute power that destruction provides is what gets Nephandi off. It exalts them with an ecstasy that is incomprehensible to those not as vile as them. God created all, so does destruction not make you more powerful than God? That is what the Nephandi believe. And when you have nothing because they have created a world without hope, being a predator, controlling others, feels empowering, especially when you lack an understanding of true power. Look, I started making this video to get away from the depressing ass subject matter of patriarchy corrupting men by making them feel powerless that I did last month. I don't know why I ended up choosing this topic to do that. I don't know why I made that choice. Being mages, Nephandi believe that the pursuit of evil is the pursuit of power. And you need to pursue power to survive, not just in this world, but in the metaphysical universe, which is, frankly, doomed. It's this horrid flash of stuff. A spear in the side of the tranquil void of oblivion. And like all things, it'll be eaten. The only chance you have is to be among those who eat. And of course, all are eaten eventually, but those who eat the most are the most powerful. And that's something you can be. That's something you can achieve. Nephandi have this reputation as demon worshippers. They enter pacts of service with otherworldly entities and become indentured to what can only be described as demons. So that word fails to encapsulate the truth of what they are. There's all these ideas of black masses and bloody sacrifices and gaudy robes, bowing and scraping to Baphomet or whatever the fuck, giving themselves fully in service to the dark god. And all that stuff, it's propaganda. Nephandi want people to believe this about them, because it's weird and insane, and it obfuscates what's really happening. Nephandi amuse themselves terribly with the knowledge that they have the whole world fooled. I mean, yeah, they do all of those things. They do them, but, they're ironic. They're doing them ironically. It's playing a game. You're the one who's falling for it, actually. And they have to do that to keep the demons they serve placated. That's kind of necessary to do for them. While they do serve those demons, they are fooling the demons also into thinking that they are loyal servants so they can learn from them and then take their power. And then when they have their power, they'll work their way to devour the next one above that, and then the next one still. Does that sound like anything else in the world of darkness? In many ways, the Society of Vampires operates this way. And in that, the truth lies revealed. The elders rear the young so they can consume them and grow in power themselves. Though of course every once in a while a younger one manages to eat an elder, and every Nephandi is convinced that they're gonna be that exception. I have a personal theory that Cappadocius, one of the antediluvian vampires who was a mage in his mortal days, this is pretty much known, was a Nephandus. If not officially, then certainly in spirit. He was, and still is, obsessed with this whole idea of diablorizing God. Literally eating God and gaining all his power, which is what all Nephandi seek to do, except in the other direction. And, he might just perceive God as more of a demon than anything else. Of course, vampires are decidedly distinct in that they resist the dark urges of their beast, lest they become nothing but the beast and completely lose themselves. In a sense, no vampire can ever become as bad as a Nephandus. Nephandi embrace this descent, because they don't become mindless eating machines when they do, or so the Nephandi believe. Nephandi do not serve or subjugate themselves, they are darkness incarnate. They believe that all light burns out, so no matter how much the flame of good banishes the darkness, it always goes out eventually, and the Nephandi operate bemusedly in the sharp shadows it creates, biding their time as they grow in power. The entities they call demons, then they have many names, not just in terms of like different words for this category of thing, but also as individual entities, originate in so-called clipothic shell universes. These are the remnants of former universes that were snuffed out, either by God or by the inevitable victory of oblivion, and all that remains in them are the most powerful evil forces grasping at our universe. If you want to get away from Christian terminology, you might refer to them as low vibrational entities, as they are literally below us in time. Some would say they are jealous of our existence, which is why they try to enter and control our world. Nephandi think that our universe is damned to the same eventual fate. And many of them think that this is right, actually. They hold that the real travesty is not corruption, but existence. In the nothing, there was no corruption and pain, because there was nothing to be corrupted or pain. It's only the grating light of beingness that ripped the void into form to torment it. So many of the more self-righteous Nephandi feel almost altruistic in forcing existence to commit suicide, to return to the peaceful state of oblivion. There are probably quite a few Buddhist-inspired paradigms among the Nephandi. Reality is not real anyway, therefore power and liberation lies not in altering it, but in destroying it. In spite of all the pathetic attempts of mages and idealists to help us ascend, it's never going to happen. The world will be destroyed, as has happened countless times before. That's why those clipothic shell universes are there, and then the powerful among them will have had the last laugh, because they too deceived their sheep. To the Nephandi, empathy is sin, and that sin is weakness. It's only a sin before yourself, of course, because it makes you edible, but they will eat you for it. The Dark Lords are the Nephandi of previous universes, and that proves that the Nephandi always win. They always corrupt the universe, because on a cosmic scale that transcends even universes, evil is the only true road to power. A thought no Nephandi really entertains that much is that, I don't know, perhaps those universes are only shells of what they were because that's what left when the rest of that universe sort of achieves Ascension. For a group that deceives and is aware of the power of deception, they take an awful lot on faith from these like low vibrational entities. Remember a few years ago the first time professional reality denialist Alex Jones was on Joe Rogan? You know, back when that show had literally any amount of redeeming qualities, when he talked about what the elites believe. His whole spiel about the elites believing in these entities from lower dimensions that are clawing their way up into the human dimension, while the forces of good were trying to help humanity reach the higher dimensions. And this was why the elites perform all these depraved acts and worship Moloch at Bohemian Grove. Yeah, he's describing the role the Nephandi have taken in the Ascension War. He's kind of talking World of Darkness lore. Now, of course, World of Darkness is deeply rooted in philosophy and religion and folklore and culture and all that jazz. So it's not surprising to me that this would look like a conspiracy theory. After all, pretty much every conspiracy theory you've ever heard of is real in the World of Darkness. But I wouldn't exactly be surprised if you lifted some of that bullshit like he peddles straight from like World of Darkness lore. Maybe through osmosis, I'm just saying. And that in a sense is how he's right about Evil Wizard. In the World of Darkness, he would be right about the elites believing this. Fuck, he might be right about the elites believing it in our world. And perhaps also the inevitable victory of the forces of good. I hope he's right about that too. Many people do subscribe to an ideology of evil in the real world, and good will win, because it inevitably does, and I will not elaborate. I'll talk about evil some more. I reckon Alex Jones would still become like a grifting sack of shit who denies the horrible murder of school children for profit. I think he would still do that probably in the World of Darkness. But hey, there was like a brief moment in time in the late 90s where he was more of a liberal than a conservative, if you can believe it. He still buys his coffee from communists. But okay, you've taken the bait. How does one actually become a Nephandus? Well, most of the suckers never reach that stage. They become stuck and lost in cults or political extremist organizations of every stripe. Mages are the most powerful among them. Many go completely insane and just turn into psychotic murderers and torturers, addicted to the feeling of power over others that this brings. Those tend to be the Nephandi who have their bodies shredded by werewolves and their souls shredded by mages. The loud ones that create a lot of despair. The wiser, more strategic Nephandi follow the descent down into the Qliphothec tree of knowledge, a 10-stage process that is an inversion of the Kabbalistic tree of life, like pointing down. It's the anti-Kabbalah, which isn't to say that like a Kabbalistic paradigm therefore has a greater claim to reality than others in World of Darkness because all the evil mages believe it. The Qliphothec tree is still a worldview, right? It's a powerful paradigm given shape by many mages believing it over the years. It's perhaps one of the most strongly ingrained in consensus simply by the fact that, like, you know, there just aren't that many Nephandi. And they have tended toward this over the centuries and millennia because the culture isn't big enough to create too much divergence. But it's not the only way of viewing it, and every Nephandus certainly sees it in their own individual way, because that's kind of the premise of Mage. Most magical traditions have a so-called left-hand path, a way of doing that magic in a way that's like evil and predatory, takes shortcuts where there should be none. Mages of all traditions, conventions, and crafts can and do become Nephandi. So they often use the Qliphothec tree as a sort of translation convention, a bit of a Rosetta Stone for discussions of descent. Mages do this all the time. Overall, you can envision the descent as having 3 major stages. The Call, the act of transformation, the Road to Leviathan, the act of acquisition, and the Black Diamond, the act of becoming. Evil is common. Mages who subscribe to evil are rare, and only after stepping into a call does one become a true Nephandus. Call is also a term we find in Wraith the Oblivion, and there it's the protective cocoon that manifests around new arrivals in the underworld, the cocoon through which one transforms into a Wraith. For Nephandi, it is also a cocoon of transformation, but it actually takes the form of a gate of some kind, often a literal flesh gate, sometimes a more metaphorical passage, or even a chamber. A potential Nephandus must go willingly into a call, and in that descent they are brought into a sort of private realm, a second awakening, a spiritual seeking that consists of torture, carnage, and annihilation of the self. It's not really clear what happens in a call exactly, but Nephandi hold that it brings you to a realm called Daath, which is sort of an anti-heaven, a realm of constant predation of the weak, where demons reside and do what they want with the Nephandus. It is theoretically possible to throw any mage into a call. You can even throw in non-mages, it's entirely possible. But most people are just shredded by what happens in there. And mages choose to die rather than endure subjective centuries in torment and agony they understand to be designed to corrupt their soul. They don't welcome that shit. The Nephandus must withstand the torments of that place, adapt to it, survive in it, thrive in it even, and finally accept it as the ultimate expression of their actualized self. They must view this place of eternal war and pain as the highest personal paradise a person can achieve. Or lowest, I guess. And in that process, their avatar, the shard of the divide that guides them toward ascension as a mage, is rendered and everted inside out. So when we talk about enlightened scientists and mages being opposites that are exactly the same, a Nephandic avatar is actually the opposite of both of those things. Nephandi are metaphysically the opposite of mages. Instead of working toward ascension, they work toward descent, dragging the mage further and further down. But of course, when you take any shape and invert it to the opposite of itself, it's usually still the same shape, just upside down. So Nephandi still do magic. They have their own spheres, the Qliphothec spheres, or edgy spheres as I like to call them, which can create the same effects but in evil ways. Correspondence, which manipulates the fabric of space, bends it, folds it, and brings disparate points together, is instead used to annihilate space between points, crush space, or tear it apart altogether. Entropy, which deconstructs and dematerializes, rethreads the strands of fate by directing chaos, is instead used to ruin and decay beyond the point of possible reuse or regeneration. Forces, which enervates and moves around, exerts energetic impulses upon the world, is instead used to slow and halt, to block, to interrupt, to drain energy away. Life, which heals and cultivates, nurtures and empowers, is instead used to fester and warp, grow cancers and diseases, disturb flesh and tissue into parodies of themselves. Like, Tzimisce vicissitude, for instance. Matter, which provides a stable and reliable fundament, a framework of solidity prone to transformation, is instead used to hollow and destabilize, to trap and bind against all sense. Mind, the essence of thought, of memory, which gently shapes ideas and sensations, benefits the flow of consciousness, instead frays, deletes, forces unnatural thoughts that could never occur, and erodes defenses against dark entities. Prime, which brings the sublime essence of magic, manifests impossible wonders in the Tellurian, instead unravels magic, poisons spells, and halts the very act of creation. Spirit, used to commune with unseen entities, often manipulate or please them, becomes a line to channel demons and a weapon to destroy everything that isn't. Time, the dimension of causality, of eternity, the endless unfoldings of chains of events, is limited, looped, used to rip to shreds at the very root, undoing instead of making happen. Now, regularly these spheres can of course be used to do evil things, and in fact that happens all the time. The difference lies in the approach Nephandi have to reality. They hate the spheres and what they represent. They wish to mock them, use them in the most disrespectful and inelegant ways possible, which in many ways is not that hard. Ultimately, though, they can achieve the same effects. They're just better and worse at some. Once the ecstatic purification of being extruded through the pustulant rectum of absolute evil is achieved, and you step out of the call again, you are a proper, full-fledged Nephanders, and can begin your road to Leviathan. This is the majority of the Nephandic existence, the process of gaining more and more power by leaning deeper and deeper into evil, engaging in ever more depraved acts and amassing power. Sure, Nephandi were doing that before, but there was always a remnant of humanity there, right? Always a vague chance of redemption and finding your path again. A proper Nephandus is literally metaphysically beyond that. And believe me, it has been tried. Especially among the Chakravanti, the Euthanatoid traditions, the Death Mages, there are still those who seek to restore these souls to their path, to right their dharma. But Nephandi have rejected the proper path, so most of the Chakravanti who deal with them are tasked specifically with annihilating them. Of course, all the traditions do this, as does the technocracy. There is no mercy when it comes to Nephandi. They will literally destroy their souls and avatars. And they all have specialists at doing this. So you might think that, I don't know, maybe the Chakravanti are particularly zealous because, having a sinister reputation, unfounded of course, they want to set themselves apart as much as possible. But of course, that's not the reason at all. The Chakravanti are just particularly focused on fate and the karmic wheel, which Nephandi have rejected in ways that go beyond just straying from what they were supposed to do. They are constantly pulling everyone from the wheel also into a space that is antithetical to existence. That is why the Chakravanti are particularly concerned. But of course, to hunt Nephandi, you must learn to think like them, and the Nephandi are excellent at exploiting that and making you fall. The means and methods which Nephandi pursue are often heavily colored by their original paradigm. There are literal evil wizards who use dark hermetics and goetic rituals and warty witches who like make vile potions and fetid poisons. You know, the classic kind of stuff. It's out there. But you also have cybernetically augmented techno-torturers, drug-hazed artists of carnage who work with blood palettes, and anti-senseis astrally projecting to like the edges of the void where they can sever the souls of meditating monks. The technique is secondary. What matters is that it be used in an evil way. Their road to Leviathan is not just a road that brings them closer to communing with the higher demons, it also brings them closer to becoming Leviathan. There's no, like, real endpoint to this. You might say that all demons in the underworld are still on their own road to Leviathan because it's like a constant eating and being eaten. Inevitably, there is always the element of self-delusion here that even though, you know, they're starting at the back foot and most people who go down this road are suckers, somehow they'll be the ones who make it. Almost as though they were like an analogy for some kind of like system or person in the real world. But of course, I mean, I can't think of it because it's like I'm trying so hard to keep politics out of my games. The espoused ideal, like the vision of the Nephanders, their equivalent to Ascension is to become the Black Diamond, the ultimate state of hardened perfection, born from acquiring more and more and it being compressed by the merciless forces of chaos. The demons, of course, still living in Hellhound Eat Hellhound reality, suggest that there is not really any such state, and it's an abstraction to give Nephandi some measure of perverse hope that they may one day find peace in being truly unassailable. On the other hand, nobody really fucks with the most powerful demons, and while they certainly war one another, it's mostly their servants who are collateral damage. To exploit and oppress those lesser than them is always easier. And honestly, compared to mortality, even like magical mortality, being a powerful demonic entity must seem like a Black Diamond state even acknowledged that perhaps they are not the most powerful of demons. It's really hard to know anything about them anyway. They're so far beyond human understanding without even trying. And I suppose that's what sets them apart from the Nephandi, who very much are trying to affect that aesthetic of being beyond humanity. But in doing so betray a deep understanding of that exact humanity in their vile and transgressive actions. Locking a maternity ward into a time loop so you can manipulate the nurses into flaying the babies and the mothers into eating them, abducting a whole city's pets just to like live stream how you put them into a meat grinder, or imbuing a homeless guy with like just unbreakable powers of regeneration while driving his pain receptors up to not 11 but like 1,000,000 and subjecting him to eternal torture. These acts are inconceivably evil, but they are not acts of inconceivable evil. They are essentially the acts of posers, right? Edgelords. So I guess the road to Leviathan is just like, fake it till you make it. You'd think that people who think like this are paranoid enough to like always try to go their own way. I mean, sure, they have their cults and stooges, but you wouldn't want anyone above you, or Satan forbid, next to you. Unfortunately, it's not that simple. Sure, some Nephandi do strike out on their own, and they never last long. Even in the world of evil, there is safety in numbers. You'll always tend to have some sort of master. It came free with your initiation, but your peers may well prove useful to you if you play them right. There's also a certain diversity in the views of Nephandi, and many fall somewhere on a spectrum between personal and global dissent, just as mages do. And especially those leaning more toward the global side of things understand that no matter how powerful they become, they cannot fulfill their mission alone. Organizing is useful, so while they tend to be disloyal and cantankerous, it's not quite every man for himself. They have a great diversity of titles and organizations, but much like the Klipothic Tree of Knowledge is a common element of translation, certain ranks and roles appear again and again. And even when an Nephandus doesn't understand themselves as a particular rank, they will know and understand that others see them that way. At the lowest, or I suppose highest point, according to Nephandic logic, are the Dregvati, the dregs, which probably comprise the majority of what outsiders think of as Nephandi, even though they aren't even actual proper Nephandi. They're cultists, servants, slaves, targets who are utterly disposable and do the bidding of the proper real Nephandi. Most of them have never even heard the term Nephandi before, like they think they're just part of whatever cult that they serve. Most of them are mortals and sorcerers, but there are some mages who have become devotees of Nephandic thought, those who have taken the first steps down the path of corruption, but who have not entered the call yet. Though they are dregs, for obvious reasons, they're not quite as disposable, but assets that need cultivation. That doesn't mean they're never used or disposed of course. Nephandi are all those who survived the call and had their avatars inverted. But here we are faced with a fundamental problem with the metaphysical nature of Nephandi. Not all those who have inverted avatars are in fact Nephandi. Because sometimes Nephandi die, and when their avatars are not destroyed, they get another go on the merry-go-round of reincarnation. So we end up with kids who, through no fault of their own, are born with a demonic shard in them. Such people are called Widerslanger, and they create a dangerous dilemma for the traditions. They are metaphysically Nephandi, but they're not formally in the organization. They don't subscribe to its philosophy. And though they have this dark urge within them, they may not necessarily want to be bad people. While a Nephandis can never be saved, a Widerslanger can resist the nature of their evil avatar, and good mages work tirelessly to make that happen. But there's always a huge risk that they will fall, at which point the resources spent to keep them from doing so were wasted, and they are in an excellent position to drag good-natured souls with them. But because Nephandic avatars tend to be hunted and rendered in their own right, most Nephandi are not Widerslanger, but Barabi, converts from all over the world of Mage. All Nephandi are considered Nephandi, of course, but there are certain higher ranks and functions that these guys have not stepped into yet, or perhaps have no desire to step into ever. For instance, the Shaitan are the muscle of Nephandic forces, the real killers, the seasoned warriors who command elite groups of hardened mercenaries. They may not be so good at the grand world-spanning plots, but they are powerful agents of mayhem. When the Nephandi want to see someone dead, and usually that does mean you and your player characters, this is who they send. The Ad-Sinistrati are the opposite of that. Their job is recruitment, and whatever passes as diplomacy among the fallen ones. They are cunning manipulators, silver-tongued social engineers, who seek targets to corrupt, and who are sent to entreaties with other forces of fundamental evil because they tend to be excellent social chameleons. Or, and this is actually much more common, they act as infiltrators in the traditions, the crafts, or the technocracy, usually because that is where they were recruited from in the first place. The Prelati are the true masterminds, the generals and planners. They have rank, command, and seniority on their side, and they just get to tell other Nephandi what to do. Which also means that they need to have the means to ensure that the people they send to do their bidding actually follow through and don't try to backstab them. So they cultivate fear, devotion, all manner of incentives to manage their personnel. The Ashra, with 3 A's actually, also known as Galedians, are the formal masters of the Nephandi, incredibly powerful wizards, archmages of the inverted spheres, who lead twisted existences beyond the bounds of reality, almost seen more as proper demons than people. And frankly, many Prelati are quite happy that they cannot come to the real world anymore, because that means they can manipulate them as much as they do their underlings. Or so the Prelati believe. And finally, the Aswadim. Perhaps, or perhaps not, the true masters of the Nephandi, the bodhisattvas of the fallen, who have attained such a low degree of endarkenment that they are effectively indistinguishable from the actual demons. Much like the highest-ranking mages who don't quite ascend, the sages of evil sort of stand on the verge of the absolute darkness, helping others to descend down there. Why exactly they haven't taken the plunge themselves is anyone's guess, frankly, but it's something that when you are standing down by the ultimate precipice, it's perhaps a little late to think about that, to question that sort of thing. But of course, the Aswadim themselves will say that they have in fact lowered themselves into the Clipothic universes and become real demons. And who's to say that that's not true? While the influence of Nephandi can be felt everywhere, they tend to keep their chantries more secret and hidden than most mages. In fact, they're not even called chantries, but labyrinths, which is not exactly the same as the labyrinth at the bottom of like the underworld in Wraith, though many are connected to that very place. A really cool canonical labyrinth is Dracus Vakor, accessible through a lighthouse on a barrier island off the coast of Georgia, and located in Ulik Batu, the Sea of Ash, an endless ocean with no surface, but a sickly fluorescent floor. Inhabited by warped and mutated bioluminescent sea creatures like giant crab octopus, human-faced shark orcas, or eel swarms that coalesce into shadow clouds. People can breathe water here, tarnishing their lungs, of course, but they can make it to the dark metal fortress of Dracus Vakor at the bottom of the sea. It has the vibe of a grimy Victorian underwater base, right? Claustrophobic, yet sprawling, with bulkheads and portholes containing like a group of, actually not even Nephandic mages, they're tradition mages who have been trapped there by the Nephandus Galarius Emerald Eyes. They are tended to and overseen by creatures called hooded horrors, sort of slick black hoods with a vague semblance of something insectile in their shadowed interior. They speak their own language, which mortals cannot understand, but given that all this started as part of like a demonic island cult in that area of the world, generally speaking, they might just be speaking like Hoitoiter brogue. I mentioned Dracus Vakor because it is in the best World of Darkness book, The Crab Book! It's actually only mentioned in the Crab Book and more properly described in the Book of Chantries, but it is in there, right? And that allows me to mention the Crab Book. Much like the traditions have their traditions and the technocracy has its conventions, the Nephandi are split into various sects that all have their own outlook on descent into darkness. They are much more fragmented than the factions of either, but there are three main sects worth mentioning. Well, perhaps the only reason these three sects are the ones mentioned is because they can be slotted into that famous framework that makes sense in some way, as they each represent a corrupted evil aspect of the cosmic triad. There are smaller Nephandic sects that actually may be bigger, nobody knows, because it's not like they have a census, but these three are the most important because they can be the most easily taxonomized. The Infernalists are the classic devil worshipper type guys. They have their secret cults with complicated arcane designations, ranks and positions, practicing complex rituals involving blood sacrifices and alchemical concoctions with ingredients like, I don't know, the left eye of a third child or the lungs of a guy who is technically still alive. There are countless different cults with often very different aesthetics and structures, but they all serve some sort of demon or demons, even though they are often deceptive about that sort of thing and pretend to worship God instead some of the time. The Bible Belt is full of churches serving infernalist purposes. Their ideology has utterly pervaded US Protestantism. Some of them are quite sprawling organizations and tend to include many non-mages. They see themselves as the traditionalists, the old guard, very formalized in what they do and set in their ways, even though technically, of the three major sects, they are the youngest one. In triadic terms, they represent the worst aspects of the Weaver: authority, subservience, control, rigid hierarchies that seek to erase the will of those caught within them. A classic Infernalist Nephandus, crucially not a canonical figure but one I made up, could be Chak Ko'olel, who claims to serve the vengeful gods of Xibalba, the Mayan underworld, in a revanchist war against the church. Almost 2 centuries ago, she was just a girl in a Catholic orphanage in Yucatan, bound to strict discipline by nuns who loved physical castigation, and abused by a priest just as most of the other girls were. She awakened in a moment of pain, and actually banished him to the spirit world, where he didn't come back from, which led to her discovery and recruitment by the Celestial Chorus, whom she studied with for almost 2 decades. She always had like a dark and manipulative streak, but it was considered and treated as a wound from her incredibly terrible upbringing. Eventually, she discovered that the reason she'd been an orphan was that her village had been razed and her family slaughtered by Catholic settlers. An Atsinistratus necromancer who had kept an eye on her lured her down the path by puppeteering the wraiths of her parents and promising vengeance and eventually the power to protect herself from God and his servants. These days, she looks almost like a skeleton with sunburnt skin, though she has a tendency to disguise herself when needed, in which case she prefers to dress up as a nun, usually matronly and kind, but sometimes nubile and innocent when the situation calls for it. Though she worships the demons of the Mayan underworld, her worldview is still distinctly Catholic in how it's structured, and that is the world in which she operates to corrupt. She has a cult of sort of a Catholic Mayan occultists she brings to the truth by introducing them to saints who are really these sort of Mayan demons, and reminding them of all the horrors that have been done to their people. Her faction includes quite a few freedom fighters, especially of the intellectual variety, though not many ideological anarchists, which are of course common in Yucatan, because they can smell her infernalist need for hierarchy from kilometers away. As long as they obey her, she treats her followers well, like righteous warriors doing important work, reclaiming the land from oppressors. Many of them are not super into the idea of needing to enter pacts with demons to make that happen, but she can be very convincing. Her labyrinth is El Templo Bajo el Sol Negro, an overgrown temple complex that is in equal parts Mayan and Spanish colonial, under a red sky where a sun black as the void always stands at noon. It can be accessed by staring at the sun on the grounds of the orphanage she grew up in until you are blinded by it, at which point you find yourself staring at the black sun in her realm. When the wind howls through the dark jungle all around, the leaves cry with the agony of generations of genocide enacted upon the Mayan people. The trees are not rooted in soil, but jagged spires jutting up from the darkness of Xibalba below. One of the most important areas in the temple is the Red Pit, where Chakkolel keeps a vampire, a Tremere anti-tribu ancilla, chained and fed in a state of permanent pseudo-frenzy. This is necessary so she can access the powers of the blood, including disciplines. She's actually quite adept at Tremere blood magic, which helps her manifest various minor paradox-proof effects when she needs to. Nobody knows who this vampire is or how she got him here, but he's been down there longer than anyone can remember. And he didn't get nuked in the 90s when all the Tremere anti-tribu got nuked, so, you know. Then we have these guys, who I can only assume are pronounced Sha'a, and whom I will henceforth be referring to as the Outsiders. They are the Nephandi whose paradigms have not just seen beyond, but beyond even that. And then a lot further beyond that even. They are a rejection of absolutely everything conceivable and all things unconceivable besides. Where others worship dark inversions or antagonists to protective spirits, evil aspects of the human condition, the Outsiders commune with beings so far beyond our frame of reference that we have absolutely no hope of comprehending them. They are neither evil nor malicious, simply because those categories of thought mean absolutely nothing to them. And the same is true about the Outsiders. They engage in acts of unspeakable cruelty and evil, and they recognize them as such, but they are paired with a feeling of an almost beneficent exaltation. Evil is the path to power, but it also doesn't really exist, right? It's a human construct that a true god should grow beyond. They understand that others perceive what they do as evil, they're just sort of fine with that. When they steal a bus full of backpackers in whatever, remote, middle of nowhere backpackers go to, nail them to the walls of a pit, connect their mind to a stone that links them all, and then they bake the stone until their souls are nothing but ash, it is a gift that they give to those people. They're not delusional about the pain, of course, but they think that they are not victims, right? They are tools in a great work that they could never understand. They are privileged to have their existence erased in pursuit of such glory. Because the Lovecraftian entities they worship are so strange and diverse, they are the smallest and least organized of all the sects, and don't really much care for rank, pomp, or ceremony. Unlike the others, the few followers they do gather tend to be treated with greater value and respect. Their cultists may not understand the truth in any meaningful way, but they understand it more than everyone else does. Not that this stops them from manipulating and maiming them in horrifying ways. In the Cosmic Triad, they represent the wild, the force of chaos and unpredictability, a complete and utter lack of discrimination. An example outsider, once again not canon but of my own making, might be the leafless Abu al-Khidai who has no leaves. He may be found by those who lose their way in the flickering dunes of the Erk Chech in the Sahara, an area the Tuareg travel through only with great trepidation. You may see him if you have truly lost your way. He will be on the horizon, looking at you, and if you approach, he will remain on the horizon in spite of never moving a step until you are on the edge of desperation. He's a small man, completely hairless, and dressed in simple robes, constantly spitting a caustic liquid out of the corners of his mouth, which runs down to his chin, where it has formed sort of like a crystalline beard that smells horribly of sulfur and vinegar. At this point, you will be so pained by thirst, you will drink even this spittle, served in a broad bronze bowl, and he will send you on your way to return to the place you have lost. Though you will be unable to speak of the experience, it will haunt you. Sometimes you will wake at night remembering the pain of drinking the spittle, paired with the exhilarating relief of feeling your thirst finally quenched. And one night you will comprehend. You will go into the desert and be willingly swallowed by a maelstrom of sand. This is where the story ends, but what lies on the other side of the maelstrom, and nobody knows about this really, is Abu al-Khidai's labyrinth, the name of which roughly translates to the skullcap of a man who hangs upside down from the chin of God. It is a cavernous realm composed almost entirely of rotting fat in various shades of yellow, grey, and black, constantly shifting and vibrating. It's inhabited by bone worms shaped like a human thumb, and floating, ray-like creatures that ululate orgasmic moans through the halls. At the heart of it, there is a mountain of bubbles, each laden with a different, intensely acerbic and alchemical smell. And the largest bubbles are where Abu al-Khidai and his followers reside, cultivating pustules on the fatty floor that manifest into fragments of black stone. Abu al-Khidai meditates on these fragments and then does as they tell him. After that, he slots them into the great stone at the center of his complex, a non-Euclidean formation that'll give you a headache if you look at it for more than a minute, and which Abu al-Khidai often spends days on end contemplating. The greatest honor for one of his followers is to be immured in this stone, which he says he will one day ride to the place of truth. And finally, the Malfeans, ultimate incarnates of primal annihilation, the true agents of oblivion. The term Malfean also appears in Wraith, the Oblivion, and also to a lesser extent in Werewolf the Apocalypse. And though they represent different things in those games, these things are still very much related. Remember that everything in World of Darkness is a matter of perspective, right? The game lines all represent groups that only see each other from a distance. And language, it works that way. Like, words and names will be misappropriated. So Malfean and Nephandi are not ancient undead or never-born entities that serve the forces of Oblivion, but they do very much still serve the forces of Oblivion. They're just not the first part. Malfeans both hate and pity existence. They hold that there is something fundamentally wrong with it, and they want to be the effectors of its end. Where Infernalists hold that evil is power and outsiders hold that evil is truth, Malfeans believe that evil is good. They are a primordial, almost spiritual sort of organization, perhaps the oldest of all the Nephandic sects, and not particularly concerned about their identity as mages. They are first and foremost servants of the worm, of oblivion, of cosmic entropy, and though they have plenty of ritualism and idolatry, they're not as precise, as exacting, as the Infernalists. They do not seek to deceive Oblivion, they see it as the ultimate ideal, and consequently have the easiest time working together, not just with each other, but with various other types of supernatural beings. Spectres, for instance, spectral Malfeans, the Pentex Corporation, werewolves of the Black Spiral Dancer tribe, certain vampiric abyss mystics, really a whole range of folks. They do still seek to dominate though. In fact, out of all the sects, they take the laws of predation, survival of the strongest, the most seriously. Their view on dissent is very much a global one, and the more powerful you are, the more you can bring it about by forcing it on others. They want war. They want climate change. They want social hierarchies that destroy the human soul. Evil is pointless unless it's inflicted on others against their will. Obviously, in the Cosmic Triad, they represent the worm, the force of entropy and destruction. And while the other sects are sort of whatever about being shoehorned into that system, the Malfeans revel in it. They fully agree. A classic Malfean of my own making might be Hudson Gore, an international businessman based primarily in Hong Kong, but he has, made New York, London, even Frankfurt his home over the years. He was born to a wealthy land-owning family in Michigan in the 1920s, and had a sheltered, privileged upbringing with parents who cared for him and siblings who looked up to him. Even the older siblings, he was a big boy. But there was just always something wrong with Hudson Gore. He delighted in cruelty and his superior physique that allowed him to overpower even many of the adults that he met. In an act of desperation, his father ensured he would be drafted into the Second World War, into a particularly dangerous battalion, hoping that the Germans would do what he hadn't had the stomach for. Given his size, you'd think he would make an easy target, and he was in fact shot a few times. But he loved the carnage too much to care. Through clever manipulation of superiors, he managed to become an officer, and eventually, his squad was one of the first to breach the camps. While the other soldiers stood around in incomprehensible horror, this was one of the most beautiful things Hudson Gore had ever seen. The way in which the Nazis managed to subjugate, dominate, and exploit the Jewish people until they were no more than walking skeletons inspired him so much that he awakened to the already inverted avatar in his soul. Back home, all his family, even his extended family, very quickly died. They died. He got all the inheritance money for some reason, and then he heavily invested in the military-industrial complex, the oil industry, right-wing news and entertainment, selling fear, fear, and fear because fear keeps the prey pliable. Later, he went into international slavery ventures, mining, the cocaine business, every major evil enterprise that rose in the second half of the 20th century had Hudson Gore somewhere inside it, facilitating and profiting. He sits on the Pentex board of directors. These days he's putting money into masculinity cultures and predatory crypto schemes to ruin people's lives. He is heavily involved with the Mammonite sect of the Nephandi, and he loves the syndicate convention of the technocracy. He's corrupted that organization in ways that few others have even been able to imagine. Few get to see him anymore these days, but he leaves an impression when they do meet him. Standing at over 2 meters, always clad in fine tailored suits, muscle-bound and barrel-chested. He is especially fond of slavery. He loves the feeling of domination it brings. Loves working people until there's nothing left of them. It's the ultimate form of predation because the prey kinda does all this to itself willingly. Sometimes he likes to go old school though. Hunt for sport. He brings slaves to some remote corner of the world like the jungle, the desert, the Arctic tundra, sometimes even the ocean or vast cave systems, perhaps even locations in the Umbra. He gives them quite a head start as he transforms to adopt traits of the local apex predators, and then he goes out to fucking hunt. He has fun with it, plays with his food, likes to see them paralyzed by the knowledge that they are absolutely and utterly at his mercy, and then he eats them. Flesh and bone and mind and body and soul, all of it. His personal labyrinth, which can be accessed through many of the elevators of a number of skyscrapers that he owns, that go like all the way down into an inverted skyscraper, just as modernist in its design and filled with his most important projects and employees. All around it lies a wasteland of urban decay, caught in a constant storm of dry lightning, churning down into the central point of the world, a hole straight into oblivion, which the penthouse office at the bottom hangs just above. After one of his hunts, gorged as he is on the people he's consumed, he will sit on his obsidian toilet and shit their remains right into the maw of oblivion. And that's it. That's the three major sects of the Nephandi. There are a few smaller ones, like the Baphies, who worship Baphomet but are too cool to be Infernalists. The Mammonites, I mentioned them earlier, who use capitalism as their preferred tool for corruption. The Heralds of the Basilisk, hackers who want to bring about the creation of Roko's Basilisk. That's the demon that they worship. Anything evil that you see in the world, you can build a Nephandi cult around. In fact, try it. Put your made-up Nephandi in the comments. Here's the thing, though. What I have just described to you may seem like a bunch of implacably almighty players, right? They're the architects of all evil. Get that out of your head. The Nephandi do not create evil. There is plenty of evil already, and they harness it for their purposes. They amplify it, they promote it, yes, but they did not create evil. It is not a power they impose on the world. It is not a metaphysical means of control that they made up like a spell. It's simply the twisted ideal that they subscribe to. They desperately want you to believe that just because evil exists, evil is implacable, that destruction is inescapable, that everything is pointless because the bad guys always win in the end. And of course, they are that bad guy. Which leads to the question, inevitably, who do you think is more convinced that the truth is on his side? The powerful man who sits, or the powerful man who is constantly using his power to prove how powerful he is? It's all a lie. And it's a lie they are desperate to believe. And yes, a lie is halfway across the world before the truth has, finished tying its shoes. But the truth is also an endurance hunter. It always catches up eventually. Lies need constant energy to be maintained. The truth, being self-evident, never tires. And the truth about evil, and consequently Nephandi, is that it's weak. Evil is weak. That's why all it seeks is to be strong. The Nephandi are disloyal to one another. They cannot bear to stand in the light of friendship, even. They are so obsessed with power and dominance, and in spite of all their efforts, they have neither. Everything they do, with the entirety of their being, the traditions and technocracy have departments dedicated to countering. Departments. Not the whole organization. It's just departments. There's actually not very many Nephandi out there, and the ones who do exist are hunted without mercy. The ones who manage to evade that sort of thing are constantly jockeying and backstabbing one another. They can't really work together. They can never trust each other because they simply don't believe in the concept. Everything they do to collaborate, they waste 10 times the resources on scheming about. When everyone fears you, you only have enemies. So much of their effort is focused on recruiting because what they do is not sustainable. It cannot hold. It cannot continue. It simply doesn't work. Their power waxes and wanes. Many individuals among them are very powerful mages, but ultimately, they are always defeated. And that's what you can do with it, right? Nephandi are not supposed to be player characters. Playing them would frankly be a little bit boring. But they make fascinating antagonists. And that's really what we want from them. In terms of creating chronicles and campaigns with them, it's great to have some pure black on your palette. You can mix it with other colors or just create some contrast by drawing a strong outline. Because they're so secretive and ultimately designed to be villains, metaplot-wise, you can pretty much place them wherever you want. They might be all-powerful agents that have infiltrated the highest ranks of the technocracy or the traditions. There's official metaplots describing that sort of thing. Or maybe they're cockroaches at the bottom of the world that no amount of stumping will kill dead. If you want, you can play a campaign where they win. And there's like an apocalypse that's in line with whichever faction wins among their own number. It's maybe the last chance for the non-evil mages to make a stand and snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. Or if this kind of thing just seems sort of overly tacky and edgy to you, if it's all just tiresome, You could just not have them. Like, they could just not be Nephandi in your setting. They sure as shit don't appear in most campaigns already, so, you know, you're probably not even gonna miss them. It is, after all, and say it with me folks, your world of darkness. Thank you very much for watching this video. It has been an absolute pleasure telling you about these evil wizards. Like, comment, subscribe, share this to your relevant communities. Consider supporting me on Patreon, where one of the rewards actually is to be on my weekly live stream, Fast Food Thursday, which happens every Tuesday currently, and includes momentous events of international politics, such as us, and this is true, developing the official dumpling of the state of New Zealand. It was a huge deal. Someone pretending to be the Prime Minister showed up for the ceremony. There was a whole recipe. I put the recipe in the description. You can look at it. That is right now, that is the official, actual dumpling of New Zealand that was made and was accepted by a fake Prime Minister. And in that spirit, I gotta come up with a new outro thing to say, right? Because the reasons for this are complicated, but I elaborate on them in an interview I recently did with James Tullis on his second channel, so if you haven't heard enough of my voice right now, go watch that. So right now, I'm sticking with see you around, folks. And see you around, folks.